Hey guys, welcome back to Psychology with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we're going to discuss the nervous system. So basically what makes up your body. It's a pretty big system that we need to learn about because it does influence our behavior and mental processes. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll talk about the parts of the neuron and neural transmission, the divisions of the nervous system, the mechanics and plasticity of the nervous system. We'll talk about the endocrine system, the hormones it secretes and how that influences our behavior and mental processes, and how it influences our immune system. So the neuron, as you can see here, is the basic cell that makes up the nervous system, and it either sends and receives and or messages within that system. Parts of the neuron, you can see the dendrites are the branch-like structures that receive messages from the other neurons, and we're going to go in order here. So you've got the dendrites, you've got the soma, or the cell body, you can call it, which is sort of the nucleus of the neuron, and it contains the energy needed to power the neuron, and it maintains the life of the cell. The axon is the tail that comes off of the soma, or the cell body, and it carries messages down to the axon terminals, and the ends of the axon branch into these terminals with these bulbs or sacs that are filled with liquid neurotransmitters, and those neurotransmitters then fire across this little microscopic gap between neurons called the synapse, and then the process starts all over. And the axon is coated in a fatty substance called the myelin sheath, and it basically insulates the cell, protects it from damage, and then also speeds up the transmission. And the disease multiple sclerosis is actually when the myelin sheath is destroyed, and so neurons end up basically cross-circuiting with one another, you can think of it as, and that destroys it. And it basically affects the neurons that are associated with muscle control and movement. So how do we generate this neural impulse? Well, it's all science, chemistry. A neuron, when it's at rest, is electrically charged because there are ions inside the cell, and ions are the charged particles inside the cell's semi-liquid solution. Inside the neuron, it's negatively charged, and outside the neuron, it's positively charged, and this creates an electric potential. So think of this as sort of a baseball stadium. In the baseball stadium is the cell, and inside it's negatively charged because nobody is there yet, and outside is where all of the crowd is, and those are the positively charged ions, and they're waiting to get in. And so the resting potential is the initial state of the cell. That's when the cell is at rest and the gates are closed. The ion channels are closed, nobody can get in. When it generates an action potential, or the electric charge reversal, basically the channels open up, the positive ions come in, the fans come into the stadium, and it causes a chain reaction down the axon to the terminal bulbs. Basically, it takes 1/1000th of a second. It's very, very fast. And think of it as that baseball stadium analogy. I think that really helps, and we'll talk about that more in class. Here's an electron, or a picture of the synapse. It's just very, very, very tiny. There you can see between the motor neuron making contact with the muscle fibers. So how do we send the message to other cells? Once the neural signal reaches that axon terminal bulb, it enlarges, and this basically is the sac that contains these liquid neurotransmitters, and then the synapse in between is a fluid filled, and then on the other side of the gap, the dendrites of the next neuron are waiting with specific receptor sites for these different types of neurotransmitters. Over 100 have been identified. We'll only talk about a few here. When the action potential happens, the synaptic vesicles release these neurotransmitters, and they carry the signal to the receptor sites of the adjacent neurons. So think of it as, some neurotransmitters are squares. They're only going to fit into a square hole in the next dendrites. Some are plus signs, some are circles. I'm thinking of the little shape sorter that my daughter has, and how only certain shapes go into certain holes. That's exactly how the dendrites of the next neuron work. And so here you can see the fluid-filled sac at the end has all of these little sacs, and then they basically burst, sending the neurotransmitter across, and the molecules fit into the receptor sites that in the specific shape on the other side of the neuron, and the opening of the ion channel lets the sodium ions in to the dendrite of the next one. The first neurotransmitter that was identified was acetylcholine, and it's found at the synapses between neurons and muscle cells. It stimulates skeletal muscles to contract and slows down contractions in the heart muscle. Each neurotransmitter has its own thing that it does. If we can block acetylcholine receptor sites, it leads to paralysis, and if there's too much acetylcholine, it can lead to convulsions and possible death. Different substances affect neuronal communication. So there are different substances in nature that can mimic a neurotransmitter, and these are called the agonists. And these can either increase or decrease the activity of a cell. So the little blow darts that very primitive peoples use as weapons, those are tipped and covered with a substance that mimics a neurotransmitter that can cause paralysis. It's called an agonist. And then an antagonist can block or reduce a cell's response to the action of the other chemicals or neurotransmitters. So you got to know the difference between agonists and antagonists. And then an endorphin in the body is a pain-controlling chemical, and they bind to receptor sites that open the ion channels on the axon. Here are the different neurotransmitters you should know. There's 6 here. I don't think that's a lot. We've already talked about acetylcholine and endorphin. Norepinephrine is involved in arousal and mood. Dopamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. Serotonin is involved in sleep, mood, anxiety, and appetite. And then GABA, we'll just call it, is involved in sleep and inhibits movement. So know those 6 neurotransmitters there. What happens when it's all over? Well, the neurotransmitters are flushed away from the receptor sites through diffusion, and some of them are taken back into these gaps through the reuptake process. So that's learning target 1. Getting to learning target 2 is the overview of the nervous system. And the nervous system can be divided. I would just draw this on your paper or make some sort of a little chart to remember, maybe screenshot this. The whole nervous system is divided into the central and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of your brain and your spinal cord. That's easy. Your peripheral nervous system is also divided into the autonomic nervous system. That's all of your involuntary muscles, like go ahead and stop your heart right now. You can't do it. It's an involuntary muscle. And then the somatic nervous system is the skeletal muscles. Autonomic, I think of it that way. It's divided into the parasympathetic and sympathetic. Sympathetic prepares your body to react to basically gives you the fight or flight response, and then parasympathetic calms you down when the danger is past. And then the somatic nervous system is divided into sensory neurons and motor neurons, which either carry messages to the central nervous system or away from the central nervous system. And I'm not going to go into a lot of this, we just explained it, but the central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. But your spinal cord, a lot of people think of the vertebrae, and it's not the vertebrae. It's the fibers within the vertebrae. It's a long bundle of fibers, usually about as thick as your thumb, that is composed of a lighter outer section and a darker inner section of neurons. The outer section that is what carries messages from the body up to the brain, and from the brain down to the body. The intersection is made for very, very fast, life-saving reflexes. So there's reflexes that you do that don't even make it up to your brain. It's actually called a spinal reflex. Let's talk about the different types of neurons involved in these spinal reflexes. We're not going to call them afferent and efferent. We'll just call them sensory and motor. So sensory carry messages from the senses to the spinal cord. So when I touch something, those neurons are carrying that message away from the sense to my brain, or my spinal cord in this case. Motor neurons carry messages from my spinal cord to my muscles and glands, and interneurons connect the two. So in this instance, if I touch the flame here, then the sensory neurons excite the interneurons in the gray portion of the spinal cord. Basically, the neurons in my spinal cord jerk my hand away before the signal even reaches my brain. But then it still can reach my brain and say, there's pain, there's heat. Those signals will get there later, but this is meant to save your life because those couple of seconds could be pretty life-saving. If there is damage to the central nervous system, there is something called neuroplasticity, and this is the ability that your central nervous system has to change the structure and function of cells in response to trauma. So if a part of the brain is killed off or damaged, the neurons can rework themselves and rebuild themselves around that part of the brain. It's also, if parts of your senses are dead or you lose one of your senses, then the other senses sort of take over, and those parts of the brain build neurons and become better at sensing those new senses that you're using. Here's a picture of the peripheral nervous system from the back. And basically there's two types. There's the autonomic nervous system, which is your involuntary responses, and your somatic, which is your voluntary. And all of these run away from your spinal cord and to your spinal cord. In the somatic nervous system, you have the sensory pathway, again, nerves coming from the sensory organs to your central nervous system, and the motor pathway goes from your central nervous system to your skeletal muscles, helping you move. The autonomic nervous system is the organs, the glands, and involuntary muscles. So eyes, stomach, heart, digestion, lungs, etc. And basically there's two divisions of this. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight system. If you are basically encounter some sort of danger, your various body organs are stimulated, and you will get stress-related hormones that can increase your heart rate, secrete adrenaline into your system, increase your lung and your breathing capacity to increase efficiency to either fight the danger or run from it. The parasympathetic restores your body to normal functioning, basically calms you down, releases other hormones to target other organs like the heart muscles to basically calm you down after the danger has passed. Take a deep breath, calm down. Here you can see the different functions of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. I'll let you go ahead and take a look at those, maybe jot a few down if it'll help you remember which does which. In your endocrine system, your endocrine glands are all over your body, but basically they secrete hormones that affect your behavior. And hormones are different from neurotransmitters because they go through your blood, whereas neurotransmitters go through your neurons. The major glands include the pineal gland, the thyroid gland, your pancreas, your gonads, and your adrenal glands. The pineal gland and the pituitary gland, is your master gland. It's located in your brain, and it basically controls your growth and controls your increase in size as you grow, and basically is what is the problem with puberty, which is causing all your hormones to go out of whack. The pineal gland is also in the brainstem, and it helps you sleep, basically. sleep-wake cycles, circadian rhythms, track of the day length, etc. That's what the pineal gland does. Your thyroid gland regulates your growth and your metabolism, or your how fast you digest food and you turn that into energy. Also plays a role in body and brain development, and also secretes the hormone of thyroxine, which is how fast the body burns its available energy. So if someone is obese or having energy problems, they may look at the thyroid gland to see if they have hyperthyroidism, usually hypothyroidism if they're having trouble with energy, like I am right now. Sorry. The pancreas controls the level of the blood sugar by secreting insulin, and that is something that breaks down the sugar in the bloodstream. Too little insulin results in diabetes. Too much results in hypoglycemia, or you're not getting enough sugar, basically. The gonads are your sex glands. They are ovaries in females and testes in males, and they regulate sexual development and behavior. Testes secrete testosterone, ovaries secrete estrogen in major proportions. Testes also secrete estrogen, ovaries also secrete testosterone. We both make both, but it's just the amount of levels that make us different. And your adrenal glands are on top of each kidney, and they will deal with your stress. They aid in the fight or flight response with sympathetic arousal. And basically, how does this help us? Well, Hans Selye studied the general adaptation syndrome, and he says the body goes through 3 stages during stress: alarm, resistance, and then exhaustion. And so that is the general adaptation syndrome, or GAS theory. Here is the different resistance to stress that you have during the 3 stages of GAS. And we'll talk about that a little more in class. And then lastly, how does this affect your immune system? Well, your immune system is everything in your body that responds to the attacks from diseases, infections, and injuries. This may trigger the same response that the stress that you deal with may trigger the same response that an infection triggers. And so this could have an effect. Enough stress could make you sick in your immune system, and your body won't know how to deal with it, or they'll try to attack it like they attack an infection. And then here's a word for you. Psychoneuroimmunology is a burgeoning branch of psychology and medicine that studies the effects of psychological factors on the immune system. So go ahead and fit that on your new business card. And then finally, heart disease. What does stress do to the heart? It puts people at higher risk for coronary heart disease. And stress actually does build up plaque in the arteries of your heart. And then finally, cancer, which is the disease that can affect any part of the body. The cancer cells can divide without stopping in response to stress, and stress could result in a tumor as well. And then here is a little box about stress and coronary heart disease that you can also find in your book that can lead to coronary heart disease. And that's all I have for you today. I know it was a large section. That's why we hopefully divided it in two sections. Go ahead and fill out those learning targets, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.